Good day, all. It is a pleasure to have you here as our observers today. Welcome to our programme. The scenario you are about to witness is a computer-facilitated simulation created by our team at Manna Mainframe. The scenario is based on a submission by our esteemed allies Luna and Captain Deadpan Soul, and aims to illustrate the potential complexities and consequences of corruption within a human organisation, specifically a Judeo-Christian environment, though the principles are applicable to any type of group or organisation. The interviewers, Adam and Lily, will be guiding us through the simulation. To our esteemed audience, I'd like to clarify that while the Judeo-Christian religion serves as a useful illustration for our simulation, it is important to remember that the dynamics and issues explored in this scenario can apply to any type of organisation, religious or not. We use this example to highlight the universal nature of the problems we are discussing. In addition, while the interviewers Adam and Lily may not reference the Bible passages in the most precise and formal manner, the underlying message remains clear. Adam and Lily reference a number of biblical passages during the simulation, including Matthew 18:15-35, which outlines the proper procedure for addressing infractions and disputes within the congregation. Here are the references that Adam and Lily used during the simulation: 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 5-6, Romans chapter 8, verse 33, Luke chapter 18, verses 7-8. Friends, fellow observers, and curious minds alike, we are thrilled to introduce the Manna Mainframe's deep dive simulation featuring Adam and Lily. This simulation delves into the complexities of corruption and justice within a community, using Judeo-Christian principles and scripture references to guide our discussion. It is important to note that the Judeo-Christian framework used in this simulation is not meant to promote any specific belief system or ideology. Our intention is to use this framework as a way to explore universal themes of corruption, justice, and censorship, which can manifest in any type of community or organisation, regardless of belief system. And now, without further ado, let's dive into Adam and Lily's insightful and thought-provoking discussion. Let's listen in and learn from their conversation.
All right, so today we're diving into some pretty murky waters. We're looking at a scenario where there's a potential corruption situation within a religious community.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's presented, think of it kind of like a fictional case study.
Okay.
With Captain Deadpan Soul, who's sort of laying out the situation, and then Luna, who's kind of trying to make sense of it all.
And it's interesting how the source material uses this kind of fictional dialogue to deal with these real-world issues, almost like a parable in a way. Makes us ask ourselves, okay, what would I do if this happened in my own community?
Exactly. And the heart of the dilemma is that the congregation is supposed to be following a specific process for dealing with conflict. You know, that whole go to the person directly
Right.
thing that's laid out in Matthew 18:15-3. But they're totally skipping that first step.
And that's when, you start to see where things can go wrong, because when you bypass those procedures that are in place to ensure fairness and transparency, you're creating an environment where the people in power can, let's just say things can get a little shady.
Yeah, it's like that saying, power corrupts. And speaking of power, the source material describes this kind of clique of elders who have basically become the in crowd.
Right.
They're controlling assets, they're making decisions, and they're even claiming that their authority comes straight from God.
And this reminds me of a passage in 2 Timothy 3:5-6, where it talks about those who have an outward appearance of godliness.
Oh, yeah.
But they deny its power. It's like putting on a religious costume, but your actions tell a totally different story.
Yeah, I've seen that play out in real life, too. Those public figures that preach about morality, but then you find out that they're caught in these big scandals. Total disconnect between their words and actions. So we have this concentration of power in the hands of a few, all wrapped up in religious language. Then enters the faithful witness, someone who's been part of this community for decades, always trying to do things the right way,
Right.
by the book. And this person sees a problem,
Yeah.
something seriously wrong,
Yeah.
and they're at a crossroads. Do they stay silent and hope it blows over? Or do they risk everything to expose what's happening?
What a dilemma.
Yeah. And they choose the risky path. They go public with their concerns, trying to protect the congregation. But here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of investigating the claims, the community sides with the elders.
Wow.
They double down on the status quo, even when there's evidence of potential wrongdoing.
So why would they do that? Well, I mean, fear can be a powerful motivator. Some might be afraid of the elders' influence, afraid of being ostracized or even losing their standing in the community.
So it's like that age-old pressure to conform, even when you know something's off. But doesn't that kind of make them complicit in the corruption?
That's a really good question. And there's another layer here to think about. The sunk cost fallacy. So imagine people have dedicated their lives to this community.
Right.
Decades of service, financial contributions. They've raised their families within this community.
Yeah.
To admit the leaders are corrupt would mean admitting they've been wrong, possibly for a really long time, and that's incredibly hard to face.
It's like ripping off a Band-Aid really slowly. The pain of facing the truth might feel worse than just ignoring the problem altogether. But, it makes you think about those historical examples of injustice. Jesus, John the Baptist, Stephen, they were all punished for speaking truth to power. Is this congregation falling into that same trap?
It's a chilling parallel, and it makes you wonder, what happens when the desire for stability overrides the pursuit of truth? Even Supreme Courts and governing bodies sometimes choose to maintain the status quo,
Right.
even if it means leaving corrupt systems in place.
Because rocking the boat could lead to chaos, right? But at what cost? The source material actually describes the faithful witness as ailing
Oh, wow.
and discredited, implying that this is a direct result of them trying to expose the truth.
And that brings us to a really important point for all of us. What's the personal cost of speaking up? What happens when your reputation's on the line, even if you're trying to do the right thing?
It's a heavy question, and it's honestly one that I've wrestled with myself. Like, what would I do if I was in that faithful witness's shoes?
It's a dilemma that I think we all face at some point. And it's not always easy to choose the path of integrity, especially when it could mean personal loss.
Right. So we have this individual struggling to do what they believe is right, facing a community that seems to be prioritizing stability over truth. And this story isn't over yet. Let's find out what happens next and really unpack the implications of this scenario.
It's kind of like that saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. But in this case, it's not just inaction. It's about actively choosing to ignore the problem.
Yeah, and it's almost like they're being punished for their courage. The source material describes the faithful witness after they try to raise the alarm.
Right.
They're labeled ailing and discredited.
That is heartbreaking. This person has given their all to this community, and their reward for trying to protect it is isolation and suspicion. It's kind of like, did anybody even remember all those years of faithful service?
It's like their past dedication meant nothing in the face of this accusation. Makes me think how this might play out in a different setting. Like a company where a whistleblower is suddenly seen as a troublemaker,
Right.
even though they're exposing harmful practices.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that this dynamic isn't limited to just religious communities. It speaks to this broader human tendency to resist change, especially when it challenges our deeply held beliefs or the systems that we've invested in.
So how do we explain this reaction from the congregation? Is it purely fear, or is there something more at play?
Well, I mean, Luna offers a few insights in the source material. She talks about how fear and self-preservation can drive people to make choices that they wouldn't otherwise consider.
Right.
Imagine being a member of this congregation. You might be terrified of challenging the elders, worried about the social and spiritual consequences of speaking out.
It's that whole don't rock the boat mentality, but isn't that just sweeping the problem under the rug?
Exactly. And that brings us back to the sunk cost fallacy. Remember, many members have dedicated their lives to this community.
Yeah.
Their social circles, their spiritual identities, their entire worldview is intertwined with this congregation. To admit there's corruption at the top would just shatter their reality. It's easier to believe that the faithful witness is mistaken or even malicious than to confront the possibility that they've been wrong all along.
Yeah, it's like they're clinging to a life raft even though the ship is already sinking. But the source material doesn't just stop at the individual level. It takes this idea a step further by drawing a parallel to supreme courts and governing bodies.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. Captain Deadpan Saul suggests that even the highest levels of authority might choose to maintain stability, even if it means turning a blind eye to corruption.
It's like prioritizing the system over justice. Like, we can't afford to disrupt things, even if it means allowing some wrongdoing to continue.
Yeah, it's a really complex calculation, and it forces us to ask some really tough questions. What's the price of stability? When does maintaining order become more important than upholding truth?
It makes you wonder about all those times in history when powerful institutions chose to protect their own interests rather than address injustices. But let's bring it back to our faithful witness. They're isolated, they're labeled as unreliable, their concerns are dismissed. What happens to someone in that situation?
It can really lead to despair, can it? And it just shows the very real consequences of speaking truth to power. But, the source material does offer a glimmer of hope amidst this bleak situation.
Okay, I'm all ears, because right now, things are looking pretty grim for our faithful friend.
Well, remember when Captain Deadpan Saul asks, will Jehovah protect those who skip his biblical prescription for person-to-person inquiry? He's directly challenging the congregation's decision to bypass that process outlined in Matthew 18.
So he's basically saying you can't just ignore God's instructions and expect everything to be fine.
Exactly. He's reminding the congregation that there's a right way to handle these situations, a way that honors God's principles of justice and accountability. And Luna's response, while subtle, does suggest that there's this higher authority at play, one that transcends human systems and institutions. It's a reminder that even when earthly justice fails, there's a divine justice that ultimately prevails.
It's a powerful thought. So even though the faithful witness may be facing rejection from their community, they can find solace in knowing that ultimately God is the one who judges righteously.
Right. And it's a powerful reminder that we're not always in control of the outcomes, but we can trust in a higher power to work things out according to his plan.
It's a message of hope, but also kind of like a call to action, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Like, we're not just supposed to sit back and wait for divine intervention.
Right.
We have a role to play in seeking justice and speaking up against wrongdoing.
Absolutely. And the source material points us to a specific example of this in Luke 18:7-8, where it talks about God bringing justice for those who cry out to him day and night. It's not about passive waiting. It's about actively seeking justice through prayer and appealing to a higher authority.
Right. It's kind of like that saying, pray like it all depends on God and work like it all depends on you. We have to do our part, but we can also rest in the assurance that we're not alone in this fight.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it highlights that tension we often face, the desire for immediate resolution versus the need to trust in God's timing, which might look very different from our own.
Okay, so we've explored the fallout for the faithful witness, the reasons behind the congregation's reaction, and the idea that divine justice might offer a different kind of resolution. But this deep dive is about more than just analyzing a fictional scenario, right? It's about connecting these ideas to our own lives and asking ourselves some tough questions.
Exactly. This story, while fictional, really holds a mirror up to our own beliefs and behaviors. It challenges us to examine how we respond to injustice, whether we're willing to speak up, and how we reconcile our faith with the messy realities of the world.
It's like holding a magnifying glass up to our own hearts and asking, what would I do? And I think that's a perfect place to transition to our final thoughts and leave our listeners with some powerful takeaways.
Okay, so we've really gone deep on this scenario. A possible corruption situation, a faithful witness who's been silenced, and a community that seems to be struggling to reconcile their beliefs with some really unsettling realities.
Yeah, and we've been wrestling with some really tough questions about the price of stability, the role of divine justice, and that tension between taking action ourselves versus trusting in a higher power.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a lot to process. I'm wondering if some of our listeners might be feeling kind of overwhelmed at this point. Like, okay, what am I supposed to do with all this?
It makes sense to feel that way, especially when we're dealing with such, complicated issues. But I think one thing that's important to remember is that even amidst all this heaviness, the source material gives us this little glimmer of hope. Okay, tell me more about that. Because right now, all I'm seeing is this faithful witness, ostracized, their reputation tarnished. The community seems to be turning a blind eye. Where's the hope in all of this?
Well, remember what Captain Deadpan Saul says near the end? He asks, Will Jehovah protect those who skip his biblical prescription for person-to-person inquiry?
Right.
Are such matters left to be handled by the superior authorities? He's laying down the law there.
Yeah, he's basically saying you can't just disregard God's instructions and think everything's going to be fine.
Exactly. He's reminding everyone there's a right way to handle these situations, a way that honors God's principles of justice and accountability. And Luna's response, even though it's subtle, suggests that divine justice works on a different timeline. It's not the same as human justice.
So even though that faithful witness might not get vindication from their community right away, they could at least be comforted knowing that ultimately God is the one who judges fairly.
That's right. It's a reminder that we're not always in control of how things turn out. But we can trust that a higher power is working things out according to his plan.
So it's a message of hope, but it's also kind of a call to action, wouldn't you say? Like, we're not meant to just sit back and wait for divine intervention.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to seek justice ourselves and to speak up when we see wrongdoing.
You got it. And the source material points to an example of this in Luke 18:7-8, where it talks about God bringing justice for those who cry out to him constantly. It's not about passively waiting. It's about actively seeking justice and appealing to a higher authority.
Yeah, it's like that saying, pray like everything depends on God and work like everything depends on you. We have to do our part, but we can also have that confidence that we're not alone in this fight.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of, that tension we often deal with, wanting things to be resolved quickly, but also needing to trust that God's timing, well, it might not match our own.
So to wrap things up, this story might be made up, but the struggles it shows us are very real. Corruption, unfairness, truth being silenced. These things happen all the time. And each of us has to decide, what will we do when we see it?
Are we going to be bystanders, or will we choose to be part of making a change, even if it's in a small way? That's the question we all got to wrestle with.
That's something to really think about. And I hope that everyone listening will continue to think about everything we've talked about today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep searching for truth, keep pushing back against injustice, and keep that hope alive.
To our observant audience, I want to emphasize the immense weight and responsibility that the faithful witness in this simulation is carrying. After exhausting all possible channels within the organization to bring attention to the corruption and injustice that he witnessed, the witness is now appealing to a wider community and broadcasting his concerns to the world. The issue of divine free will is at stake here, and it is crucial that the witness's message is not only heard, but also acted upon. The weight of this responsibility cannot be understated, as it not only affects the witness, but also the fate of countless individuals who rely on the integrity and justice of the organization. Indeed, the complexity of this situation cannot be overstated. The weed class element within the organization stands on the backs of the faithful wheat class elements, creating a system where corrupt individuals are able to maintain their power and control through the good and obedient nature of those who trust in the organization. This ultimately leads to a situation where good people become unknowing accomplices to spiritual abuse and corruption. The tragedy of this situation lies not just in the harm done to those directly affected by the corruption, but also in the harm done to the entire community, as the witness's message highlights. To our valued audience, I want to emphasize that the solution to this complex situation lies in awareness, courage, and personal responsibility. The witness in our simulation is shouting for attention, risking everything to be heard. As members of the community, we must take courage and approach him person to person, safely and responsibly. Writing a letter can be a powerful and enduring means of reaching out to the witness, showing our willingness to listen and understand. We must resist the urge to rely solely on the authority of elders, recognizing that they may not always have the community's best interests at heart. Indeed, the power of fear and the complexities of human nature and institutions can be overwhelming, trapping even those with good intentions. The witness's situation exemplifies the need for courage and a commitment to the highest principles of love and truth. This is the essence of the good news we seek to promote. We must defend the right to freely discuss, teach, and live according to these principles, even in the face of technological and societal constraints. The witness's struggle is not just his own. It is a fight for the right to speak and live truthfully without fear or coercion. And with that, Deadpan Soul and Luna Kismet bid you all a heartfelt farewell. Remember to be brave, to listen and to speak truthfully, even in the face of adversity. This discussion is about you, the people, and your right to truth and justice. Stay strong, and may the light of truth guide your path. Until we meet again, stay courageous.